All right, good morning, everyone. As I kind of mentioned already, thanks to everyone for being here on time. I hope, actually, I'm curious to get some feedback as we go through the semester on how the 8 a.m. class works out for you. What is nice about the 8 a.m. class is that it conflicts less. The reason I offered it at this time was because then there's less conflicts with other class and hopefully makes it easier for you all to schedule things because a lot of classes are in the 9 to 10 and 10 to 11 time slot. So that's my hope. I hope it's working out for everyone. I want to just give a shout of appreciation to everyone for just having strong attendance here and making it here early in the morning. So, good job. With that in mind, we're going to continue today. We wrapped up more or less our discussion in lecture on histology and tissue types in class on Monday. We will revisit that in lab next week. You'll have a whole lab looking at those different tissue types through microscope slides and learning more details about them. In the meantime, in lecture, though, we are going to move forward and talk about cartilage and bone, which will lead a nice transition into the skeletal system, which we'll get to soon. So before I talk about that, though, I want to just make an announcement. I'm trying to bring back our biology seminar series where we have guests from other universities, researchers from other places come in and give talks to students and anybody on different topics. And the first one of the semester is coming up next week, Tuesday. It's free and open to the public. There's going to be snacks. And I'm really excited about this. Dr. Andrew Mason, who's down at OSU in Columbus, is going to talk about some of his research on vipers. So he's a great speaker. It should be really interesting. So I encourage you to come spread the word for folks that are interested in this kind of stuff generally. I'm also going to host a pizza dinner with Dr. Mason afterwards. A chance to chat with him a little informally and eat some pizza. If you're interested in that, just email me and I'd be happy to add you to the list. It's free and open. I just want to RSVP so I know how much pizza to order. So yeah, come out next Tuesday. Tell your friends. Tell even not friends. It's fine. They want to know too. Don't limit your information dissemination to just friends. All right, today, I have that in the wrong order. We're going to, first I want to start off with a quick lab check-in about yesterday, just make sure I'm clear on the expectations for the assignments and what happened with the internet yesterday. Then I have our first edition of the semester of Human Anatomy in the News. Then we're going to get into cartilage and bone. I have another study guide for you. So you have some of the diagrams and associated text that goes with some of the slides. Then we'll wrap things up today. Your quiz number 1 scores are posted in Blackboard. I'm going to talk a little bit about that and give you some details. And we'll wrap things up and give you some reminders. So first, I want to just talk about the lab from yesterday. With each lab, so this is a screenshot from Visible Body. This is what it should look like for you. You go open this folder, Lab 1, at Scanning in Anatomical Terms. You'll see all of these assignments. Notice that in each lab, the first file in the folder is going to be this guide to Lab 1. That's the same as a PDF of the printed guide that I gave you yesterday in lab. And that walks you through exactly what to do, how many points each activity are worth. You can see all the links to all of the other activities here. Just to make it clear, lab assignments are due at the start of the following week's lab. So basically by 9 a.m. next week, Tuesday, that gives you time to do it if you need to do it outside of lab. As I mentioned, though, I designed lab to be done in lab, and you shouldn't have any lab homework outside of studying if you can make use of that time. Now, yesterday, I know obviously we couldn't make use of that time because of the internet. So just make sure you work through these assignments. It's pretty straightforward. From my feedback from students, it won't take you a tremendous amount of time, but that will be due next week, Tuesday in the morning. If you have questions about it as you're working through, do let me know. I apologize for that. Lab generally would not be structured like that. You generally won't be leaving lab so early and then having work to do outside of it. It's just a product of the Wi-Fi yesterday. So keep that in mind moving forward, that yesterday's lab isn't really the normal. What questions do you have about the lab structure and assignments? That's cool. All right, well, let's talk about human anatomy then. So this is a study that came out, this is a couple years ago now, within the past couple years. And we've talked a little bit about the appendages of the integumentary system, including hair. Well, a study came out that used what's called a GWAS, a genome-wide association study. Some of you have taken genetics, have probably come across that term. And basically what they did is they took the genomes of a whole bunch of people from the UK, and they looked at specific genetic markers for folks that had red hair. And you can see, this is the title of the actual scientific article, basically explaining, or their study, I should be clear, it's a correlation study looking at markers in the genome relative to people with red hair. And of course, as an example, I want to present the Weasley family, even though Percy's in there, we have mixed feelings about him. Hair color is determined for all of us by the ratio of two types of proteins, eumelanin and pheomelanin. And these are proteins that are produced by cells called melanocytes that are in your epidermis. And the ratio of these two proteins is determined by a gene called MC1R. And so basically what they found is that what kind of the genetic sequence that you have in this gene, the particular variation of this gene that you have, will determine the relationship of these two proteins. If you have more of the pheomelanin, your hair tends to be more reddish. If you have more of the eumelanin, your hair tends to be more dark brown. Other genes are important too. So what's important to note here is that it's not just one thing, yes or no, you have red hair or you don't. As with so many phenotypes in humans and other animals or other living things, there's lots and lots of variation. And so this particular gene is found to be really important, but there's some others that play a role as well. So the takeaway message here is that your hair color is genetically determined, specifically by the variant you have, especially by the variant you have at this MC1R gene, but it's complicated. You will see at least one question on an upcoming quiz or exam about the human anatomy in the news segments. There are links to both the scientific article and the popular press article about this in your class program. I won't ask you anything beyond the information that I just talked about here in class. In other words, you don't have to go to the scientific article and like read that article in detail and understand it. I just put it there in case you're interested in the topic more. I would recommend reading the link to the popular press article. Usually they're like a 3-minute read and it just gives you a little bit of background, and they're written for a more general audience, and a link to that is in your program as well. But note that there will be questions on this in quizzes and exams, usually just a multiple choice question relating to what we talked about here. Questions, comments? All right, so here is a study guide for bone and cartilage. It's not necessary. I'm not going to collect it or ever look at it. It's a Google slide file. If you want to use it and save a copy on your own and make notes on it, you have it. It's great. It's just kind of my way of compromising, not providing lecture slides, but also wanting to support you in providing some of these diagrams for you. So yeah, it's there as a resource. Use it if you like, but if you don't want to, it's fine. Did everyone that wants this code get the code? The code's working okay? All right, I like when the internet works. So let's talk about bone and cartilage. I'm going to give an introduction. We're going to talk in detail about the composition of cartilage tissue, bone tissue, and then we'll get into a little bit about how bone can changes during a lifetime, during development, and then also some disorders of that development. So let's think about the skeletal system a little more broadly. Often folks think of the skeletal system as just this, like the hard parts that are inside your body that give you structure, kind of like the rebar and concrete in a building. It's just the solid stuff that everything else is built upon, which is at least partially true. It is the solid structure, the solid material that gives your body structure, but it does so much more than that. Of course, it's important because that's where your skeletal muscles attach that provide movement, but it also serves a complex role in your hormonal system. So it's an endocrine organ. It serves as a site of mineral storage. It's where immune and blood cells are produced. And also it's a very dynamic tissue in that it can heal itself really well when it's fractured, which is actually kind of part of the problem sometimes. If you think about sometimes if you have a bone fracture and you wait too long before going to the doctor, it will actually start to heal itself. But if it's in like an improper alignment, it will heal itself so that it's not kind of lined up properly. And so sometimes you hear about needing to like re-break a bone to set it properly. That's exactly what it is. The problem is that your skeletal system is like, oh, we're broken. We got to start healing right away. And even if the bone is off center or something like that, it's going to start healing in that position. So that's why it's important that immediately after a break, you get things set, they put the metal rods in or whatever have you, get things lined up again so it heals properly. It is an amazing, it has amazing capacity to regenerate itself. It's really pretty cool. Go ahead, Kelly.
So when it comes to your tibia, so if you want to get like a rod put in it, would it be able to hold you?
Great question. It's going to depend on the nature and severity of the break. It's going to depend on where it is. It's going to depend on how big it is. Something like a hairline fracture, probably. But if it's a severe, like a compound fracture where the bone actually broken enough that it sticks through the skin, then my guess is that you would need more support to make it heal properly. Yeah, but it just depends on all of those different factors. But certainly in some cases it could. A hairline fracture is basically like just a crack where all the bone pieces are right in the same place. There's just a crack through it, and those can heal up generally amazingly quickly. So, good question. Any others? Cool. Well, let's talk about cartilage in a little more detail. We have, let me see here. Oh, well, this is just an illustration of some cartilage tissue. I'm going to come back to that actually in favor of talking about where cartilage is in the body. You have 3 types of cartilage. Where's my chalk? I want to make sure that you know these 3 types, and they're color-coded on this sheet for you, or in this diagram. In blue, you see hyaline cartilage. I'm going to write this here. That means it's really important, and you should know it. We have what's called hyaline cartilage. This is probably the most common in the body, and you can see it in blue here. It's the cartilage that connects your ribs to your sternum. You can see it's found in joints throughout the body, so in the hip joints, in the wrist, in the fingers, in the elbows, and the shoulders. It's also the cartilage that's in your nose right here. So if you feel your nose, you can kind of feel up and you can feel where the cartilage is there. It's a little bit rubbery and flexible, but as you go further up the bridge, it gets really hard when you're up here because that's where it transitions to bone. And you find this hyaline cartilage throughout the body at joints. It's super cool material. It's really, really smooth. So a good example of where you've probably all seen this close up is if you've been eating chicken legs or chicken wings recently with the bone in. When you get to those joints, you can see like that kind of hard, rubbery white material that's really like you can't chew it. You're not eating that. That's hyaline cartilage. Now, every time you eat food, you're gonna, well, anyway. The second type is elastic cartilage, which we only have a few places in the body. And what I want to highlight is the elastic cartilage that's in your ear. So this is a really flexible, strong, but flexible cartilage in your ear. And this allows your ear to get bonked around a bunch and still retain its shape. The final type that you see in red is called fibrocartilage. Right up here. Fibrocartilage is found in just a few places in the body, but very important places. It is what composes the intervertebral discs between the bones of your spinal column. You might remember, just as a throwback, that there is something called a notochord that all of us, oh God, what's the word? Vertebrates. That couldn't come up with the word vertebrates. Geez, wow, some biologists. That all of us vertebrates have at some point during development. A lot of vertebrates retain it. So for example, lamprey or something like that, you can see the notochord in adult. In us humans, we have this notochord early in development, and basically that tissue transitions and becomes this fibrocartilage. Discs. These are the discs that when you hear someone has a slipped disc, this is when those discs get misaligned relative to the bones. They can pinch nerves and cause a lot of pain. We also have fibrocartilage in 2 other places. One is the pubic symphysis. So this is this joint between your 2 coxal or hip bones right here. And then finally, we have this really tough cartilage in our knee joints, because our knee joints are subject to a lot of pressure. And so we need this really tough fibrocartilage. Just as a note, be careful. So we have elastic cartilage, but there is also a type of elastic connective tissue. So you're going to see this word elastic in a couple different contexts. Be sure you're noting whether it's elastic cartilage or elastic connective tissue, and that will become important in lab this week. So let's talk about all of these. Oh, look I had all three of those highlighted there in colors for you that I meant to put up as I talked about it. Go ahead, you. Mm-hmm. They can, the knee joint kind of sucks when it gets injured. Any of you that have had a knee injury probably can attest to that, because it is such a complicated joint and also subject to so many pressures, just in terms of like pressures in different directions. And what is especially dangerous is if you injure the knee such that you're pushing it in this way or out this way, because it's against the way that the bones and cartilage are structured to bend. What often happens is some of the cartilage that becomes damaged is removed from that joint. It's very difficult to heal because cartilage is avascular, that you'll learn about in a second. So it doesn't heal very well at all once it's injured. So yeah, it generally can be. There's a number of other small ligaments, your ACL and all that stuff that are in the joint as well. And those can get damaged in conjunction with the cartilage as well. So usually when you get a knee injury, it's cartilage and ligaments that are all getting injured. So yeah, good question. Knee injuries, no fun. Cool. Let's talk about cartilage at a cellular level. So all these three different types of cartilage have some similarities, and specifically, they all have these cells called chondrocytes that are located within lacunae. Lacunae is a plural word, comes from the Latin word lacuna, which means like a space or a cavity, like an empty, hollow space. That term will come up a number of times throughout the semester. So we have these chondrocytes. You can see they're these kind of pinky cells with the blue nucleus, and they're within, each of them is kind of within a little bit of space, right? So, oh no, wait, I'm mistaken there. Let me back up for 1 second. No, take that back. The cells are represented here by just a little blue dot here in the middle. The lacunae is this kind of orange space around, or pink space. Sorry about that. Between all of these lacunae that are holding these cells, we see a matrix that contains these fibers, right? And these are called elastic fibers in this case. And also this kind of gel-like ground substance. So it's like this kind of jelly that provides support when these tissues are compacted, especially. So we have chondrocytes and lacunae surrounded by a matrix of elastic fibers and this jelly-like substance. All of these cartilages also contain tissue called pericardium. Pericardium surrounds the cartilage and kind of keeps its structural integrity when it's bent or under pressure. So it's basically like a sheath or a covering over the chondrocytes and matrix here. The pericardium is composed of dense, irregular connective tissue. So to back up for a second, we have cartilage tissue that's composed of, we have cartilage that's composed of both cartilage tissue here, as well as this connective tissue here, in this case, dense, irregular connective tissue. This matrix that's composed of this jelly-like substance is mostly water. So in fact, your cartilage is mostly actually water, and that allows it, because of the kind of hydrostatic properties of water, allows it to sustain its structure very well when it's compact, right? And your cartilage is very often subject to like these forces that are smushing it and pushing it in different directions. And so it has to maintain its structure. So the chondrocytes and pericardium are found in all three cartilage types. I want to break down and talk a little bit about those three cartilage types in more detail. I'll give you 1 second to collect your notes here. I see some people jotting stuff down still. Okay, let's talk about hyaline cartilage first. Hyaline actually comes from the Greek word for glass because it has this very kind of almost translucent appearance, and it's very smooth. In fact, it's even smoother than ice. It's the most abundant, as I mentioned, and in this case, the chondrocytes appear spherical, and you can see them kind of right here. They're more or less these circles. And the matrix has a type of fiber known as collagen. You've probably all heard of collagen before. And the ground substance is a lot of water, kind of like all cartilages. It's located at the ends of bones, as I mentioned, in your costal cartilage. So that's the cartilage that's connecting your ribs to your sternum. Also in your nose, and I didn't mention this, hyaline cartilage is also found in association with your respiratory system. Specifically, there's these kind of rings around your trachea that allow that provide structure and support to your trachea, that basically allows it to maintain its shape as you inhale and exhale, and that pressure in the trachea changes. So super important cartilage found throughout the body, and has this importance to note that the fibers in the matrix are these collagen fibers. Now, elastic cartilage, our second type of cartilage, as you might guess, the fibers that it contains are elastic fibers. Surprising. This elastic cartilage tolerates bending really, really well, and it's found in just a couple places. I mentioned the external ear. It's also found in your epiglottis. Your epiglottis is this little flap that closes over your trachea when you swallow to prevent food or water or drink or whatever from going down your trachea into your lungs rather than down your esophagus into your digestive system. So this little tiny flap that saves our life every day, and we never really even think about it, but it is composed of this elastic cartilage. And that's, as far as I know, that's the only two places in the body where we find this elastic cartilage. So basically it can bend really well and retain it and go back to its structure, maintains that shape, which is important. You think if your ears are made of bone or more rigid cartilage, and every time you bonked it, you broke it or smashed it, and it lost its structure, that'd be really problematic. But they're made of this cool elastic cartilage. You can bend it, pull it, yank on it. It kind of hurts after a while. You can pierce it, do whatever. Last type of cartilage is fiber cartilage. And this cartilage is really, really tough. It's especially good at being pushed and pulled and maintaining its shape. And it is found in a couple places in the body. As I mentioned, your pubic symphysis, the menisci, which is the plural of meniscus of your knee, and these intervertebral discs. It has some qualities that are intermediate between the hyaline and elastic cartilage. So it has a little more flexibility than hyaline cartilage, a little less than elastic, but it's really good at withstanding this pressure. And you can see here throughout the matrix, we have these collagen fibers similar to hyaline cartilage. So those are the details of the three types of cartilage. I just want to go back to this slide and just remind you where they're found in the body. Again, they're color-coded: hyaline in blue, elastic in green, and fiber cartilage in red. I want to zoom in to one particular part of the body, the respiratory system here, and show you some other examples. I mentioned that hyaline cartilage is found in rings around the trachea. Also, there's some other cartilages that have specific names: your thyroid cartilage, your cricoid cartilage. And then you can see there's actually rings of this hyaline cartilage around all of these bronchi in your lungs. And again, these are tubes. Imagine, has anyone ever tried to drink out of a drinking straw that's not rigid? Like, they have like paper drinking straws now, and they get soggy, and you drink and it just kind of collapses on itself as you decrease that pressure in there. That's exactly what would happen to your airways if there wasn't something with a more rigid structure to keep them open. And that's the purpose of the hyaline cartilage. You're constantly changing the pressure in your trachea and your bronchi every time you breathe in and out. And these allow it to maintain the shape and be open even as that pressure changes. Also, at the very tippy top there, you can see the epiglottis. And again, that is elastic cartilage, one of two places that's found in the body along with the ears. And that, my friends, is 15 minutes on cartilage. That's all we're going to talk about with it. Questions? All right, well, let's transition. I want to talk about bone now. As I mentioned, bone is a very dynamic organ that does a lot of different things. And these things include providing support, as we talked about, providing not only support, but also movement. And so for your body to move, you need levers, basically, and your muscles are attached to your bones in such a way that allow those bones to move as levers. They protect things, as you might guess. You have a great example of that in your skull, protecting your brain. Of course, the rib cage serves to protect the heart and lungs and other organs. Your pelvic girdle, in a lot of ways, protects other organs in the lower part of your abdomen, etc. They serve as a reservoir for important minerals. So, for example, calcium is stored in your bone. Your body needs it. It can pull that calcium from your bone to utilize it. The marrow, red marrow specifically of long bones, are important for blood cell formation. I shouldn't say they're important for it. It's where those blood cells originate. And you need it so those blood cells can originate. This is why you hear about somebody that has, for example, leukemia, which is cancer of the blood cells. This is why you hear about a bone marrow transplant, because those blood cells originate in the bone marrow. So to create new, not cancerous blood cells, you need to replace that bone marrow. Also important for energy storage, importantly, there's actually fat tissue within bone as well that can be utilized as an energy source when your body needs it. And finally, it plays a role in the endocrine system. And we're actually just starting to kind of understand this in energy balance and also, interestingly, in the stress response. And so, for example, there's this hormone called osteocalcin that's being secreted by a type of cell called osteoblasts. We'll talk about these guys in a second. But it helps regulate your sugar and fat balance and what happens to those molecules after you ingest them. There's also some other hormones that we're just discovering now that originate in bone tissue. It's actually a pretty active and interesting area of research. So there's a lot we don't know about what's going on there. So all those reasons bones are important and awesome, all the things they do. Bones as an organ actually contain all three of the four types of tissue. So they contain connective tissue, which includes bone, which is most of the bone organ is composed of this bone tissue, of course. And it has an organic component, so the cells, fibers, and the ground substance, but also your bone is pretty unique in that it has this inorganic component. And that's the hard structure of your bone that's composed of these mineral salts. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So it has this organic and inorganic component. It's this inorganic component that doesn't degrade, that's preserved, that becomes, dinosaur fossils, or that when a body of any vertebrate, is out and dies in the wild and just kind of decomposes over time, the last thing that's left is the bones. And that's specifically because they're these inorganic components. Bone organs also contain cartilage tissue, and we just talked about, for example, hyaline cartilage. Blood is present within the bone. That's another type of connective tissue. So we have these three different examples of connective tissue found within the bone organs. Also contain nervous tissue. So bones are innervated. We have nerve endings in the bones that provide information and transmit information to and from the central nervous system. And finally, we have epithelial tissue because we have blood vessels going to the bone. And so epithelial tissue, remember, provides the structure of those blood vessels, specifically a kind of tissue called endothelium. So the takeaway message here is bone is an organ. And as an organ, it contains all of these three tissue types, examples of these three tissue types. It doesn't contain skeletal muscle. Of course, it's closely associated with skeletal muscle, but it doesn't contain. All right, let's talk about some characteristics of the bone tissue. Let me just see one. Oh yeah, this is good. I have 2 more slides to get to, and we're going to change it up a bit. So bear with me. This is a little bit longer of a lecture without some activity built in than I usually like to do, but we're almost through this part, and then I have a little activity for you. The extracellular matrix, so remember, this is the stuff that surrounds the cells. As I mentioned, it has a very unique composition, and about a third of that is organic components that are more flexible and allow your bones to have some flexibility and also provide tensile strength. Tensile refers to things being compressed or pulled. 2/3 of this matrix, though, is inorganic, and that is what makes bones hard. And specifically, this is composed of this kind of mineral salt called hydroxyapatite, and especially a specific kind of this called calcium phosphate. Don't worry about that. I don't need you. I'm not going to ask you the names of these. We'll save this for your organic chemistry class. Or I guess, actually, I have to check myself. That's actually inorganic. Your biochem class. But I just want you to know that it's these hard mineral salts that provide the rigid structure of your bone. But it's important to note that your bones are both very rigid, but do have some flexibility. And so with that in mind, I'm going to talk about the 4 types of cells that we find in bone tissue. 3 of these 4 types of cells either produce or maintain bone. They are what's called osteogenic or sometimes osteoprogenitor cells. These are stem cells. These are basically immature bone cells that grow up and become osteoblasts. These are basically like the baby cells that will develop into mature cells. They're called osteogenic. They mature and they become these types of cells called osteoblasts. So these are cells that both produce and secrete the bone matrix. So these are the cells that are making all of the bone matrix. And they're active adult cells. And the term blast here, osteo, remember, is Greek word for bone. And then, and you might know that from like French, the word for bone is os, and the word for bone in Spanish is hueso. You mean the Spanish? What is it? Hueso. Okay, so close to it, but all have the same root there. Thank you. So we have osteoblast with bone, and then blast means to bud or sprout. So this is cells that are budding or sprouting your bone tissue. And then we have these other cells called osteocytes. They are kind of maintenance cells. They basically work to make sure there's nutrient exchange, to clean up waste, et cetera, et cetera. So they work in close conjunction with the osteoblasts and the matrix to keep your bone healthy and active. So it's a dynamic living tissue, and those osteocytes are responsible. That's right. Wait, so okay, I'm remembering some Spanish now. This is good. So osteogenic cells mature into osteoblasts, which produces bone matrix. All of it's kept healthy by these osteocytes. That's 3 of the 4. The 4th one is actually responsible for breaking down bone and reabsorbing bone tissue. So your bone, once it's laid down, it isn't just there for your whole life. It's constantly being broken down and then regenerated. And that type of cell is called an osteoclast. Osteoblasts and clasts are obviously very similar. Dumb mnemonic device that I use, well, not dumb, it's useful, is that B for blast also is B for build, because it's building the matrix. So that's how I remember which is which for osteoblast and osteoclast. What's interesting about these osteoclasts is they're actually a type of, they're derived from the same cell lineage as white blood cells. So these are actually specialized immune cells that secrete hydrochloric acid and other enzymes that break this bone tissue down. So basically what they do is they serve to take down, to diminish the bone tissue so that it can be regenerated with new and presumably stronger, healthier tissue. And I'll talk a little bit later in class about osteoporosis, which is a problem when your osteoclasts are doing too much work relative to your osteoblasts. You're removing more of your bone tissue then you're regenerating. So 4 types of cells. 3 of them produce and maintain bone. 1 of them is an immune cell that actually reabsorbs and breaks down bone. You can see a diagram of these cells that look like this. Generally speaking, we have, I'll talk about the structure of bone in a little bit, but we have our osteocytes that are maintaining that bone tissue. They kind of look like this. They've got the cell body with these kind of branches coming out. We have the osteoblasts that are these kind of, they almost look like cuboidal epithelial cells. They're not, but they kind of look like that superficially, forming the bone matrix. Osteogenic cells are just little baby osteoblasts. They're going to grow up someday and be osteoblasts. And then we have these osteoclasts that look very different because they are immune-derived cells and they are going to break down that bone structure. I have a quick demonstration here. Let me just go ahead. I'm going to take a little pause. Well, let me see what questions you have. And then I want to do a demonstration and then I have an activity for you. But let me just see what questions that you have right now. Yeah, go ahead.
Why do we like to break bone down? Like, why?
Good question. Why do we need to break bone down? Because over time, that bone structure will lose its integrity and basically become worn down and not function as well. So what you want to do is kind of break it down before it gets to that point and then regenerate it. So you're constantly like making sure that your bone tissue is as, I guess I'll use the word fresh. That's not the best word to use, but as well structured and has as much integrity as possible. So basically you're breaking it down because before it becomes non-functional. Good question. I saw Gia and Kylie. Go ahead, Gia. What's the rate of exchange there? Great question. I don't know the answer. I think it changes throughout your lifetime for sure. Yeah, let me look that up for you. That's a really good question. Kylie, go ahead.
I broke my
Okay.
Where I broke it, there's a large, like, circle of bone. Would osteoblasts, like break that bone down, or is
Right. So osteoclasts, they don't necessarily, they're not going to change the external shape of your bone. What they will do is within the bone, break tissue down so that it can be regenerated. So they don't act to like, you know, if you have a growth on your bone, let's say an extra part, which happened like a bone spur, something like that, they won't work to like trim that down and get your bone back to like quote unquote normal shape. They kind of work within the tissue. Yeah. So that, well, my guess is a product of the way the bone healed. And it basically, you know, your osteoblast probably laid down more bone tissue or something like that. So I don't know if the osteoclast would ever kind of change that. Yeah, that's a good question. Go ahead, Jade. Yep, that's exactly what happens. And we'll see an example of that. I'm going to talk about osteoporosis in a little bit, but that's exactly what happens is that over time, or for other reasons, these osteoclasts do a bit more work than they should, and you break down so much bone tissue that it actually becomes detrimental, and you can lose the structure. So sometimes you hear about older folks getting like suffering from a broken hip. It's a pretty common and intense injury. What is I'll say a common misconception is that people fall and the impact of the fall breaks their hip. What actually happens in that case is that bone loses integrity, the bone breaks, and when the bone in the hip joint breaks, the head of the femur, that actually causes the person to fall. So it's actually the break that happens that causes the fall rather than the other way. Sometimes, you know, often, not every time I should say, but generally, yeah.
It's a disease. I don't think it's like actually happen, but when you hurt yourself, when like I don't know, but like you start like growing bone where you weren't supposed to grow bone.
Yeah, I actually have a video clip that I show. It's actually kind of the most terrible disease you can imagine. There's an interview with a woman who suffered basically throughout her body in places that are normally soft tissue, bone tissue starts to develop, and it causes you basically like you to become immobile. Like all of these parts of your body that should be flexible and move become not flexible, and it sounds pretty terrible. There's a name for it that I can't recall, but I actually have a video clip that I show in class sometimes. I think I show it in my other class sometimes, but maybe I can bring it to here. Did we watch that one? Who was in Jada or Sarah? You were in 251 with me. Did we watch that clip? Do you remember in 251? Yeah, maybe it's for this class, but yeah, that can happen, and it's not good. Cool. Let me show, I want to do just a quick demonstration here for you. Some of you may know this already, so I apologize if it's redundant for you, but just bear with me. I want to just walk you through how, if you're viewing a video clip of lecture, you can very easily grab a screenshot and get some of the lecture slide images. So this is our class channel on YouTube. Some of you have visited. I actually haven't seen how many views there are of different lectures, but you can find video of each lecture here. And so I'm just going to go to last lecture, and let's just say we want to watch this. You missed class and you want to watch this. It's weird. I'm recording this now. It's like a lecture. We have a protective layer that keeps our insides. No, I don't want to hear my own voice. It's super awkward. Let's say that I'm here, I'm watching this lecture, and I get to this image, and I'm like, oh, this is a super important image. I want to make sure I can keep this in my class notes. What you can do, and again, some of you might know this, but if on a Windows keyboard, there's shortcuts for this on a Mac, but I don't know what they are. But if you hit the Windows key, the Shift key, and the letter S, you get this quick little interface. And what I can do now is I can just click and drag across an image that I want, any part of the screen, and then let go. And it copies that to my clipboard. So now I have my notes document. Let's say I have a Google Doc that I'm keeping notes in. These are my class notes, yay. And I want to say, here's a great image from class. And then I can just hit Control V or paste, and it will just go ahead and paste that right in. I can kind of make it smaller, whatever, too. So I know some of you have been asking about providing lecture slides, and my response sometimes has been, well, the images are available in the YouTube videos. Just want to make sure you know how you can kind of easily cut and paste those into your notes or otherwise save them. Good. Is that useful? Yeah. Okay, good. I'm glad I spent some time to do that then. Great. Let me close this, and I have an activity for you now. What time is it? Oh, we're almost out of time, actually. This is designed to take 4 minutes, so maybe we'll just do it real quick. So I'm going to give each of you one of these, if you don't mind, actually, just taking one and passing on this part for you. Here's a quick worksheet for you. And the idea is that you're going to have 1 minute to pick one of those 4 bone types we just talked about and draw a picture of it and just make a quick description. So obviously 1 minute, it's going to be really fast. After 1 minute, when you hear the gong here ring, let me find where my cursor is. Then you're going to rotate. You're going to give your paper to somebody else, which is rotate around the class. And then you'll draw another one. You'll have to look and draw another new one. And then make sure you're not drawing the same cell type twice. And then this is worth 2 class points. And the goal is to give you a study guide that you can walk out of here with, some of which you made, some of which your classmates made. So we have just enough time to do this. Let's go for 1 minute right now. And then we will rotate. And I'm going to take a note of everyone here, so you have 2 class points. Sarah's here. Morgan's here. Hey, Jim. Cell type. Yep. So it's going to be osteogenic, osteoblast, osteocyte, or osteoclast. One of those 4. Sophie's not here. Taryn's here. Matt. All right, rotate. So let's do this to keep it organized. Jessica will give it to Jada down this way, and then you'll give it back to Mark here down this way. Sarah, can give it to Rand behind you, and then back down here. I will take Terrence, and I'll bring it down to this.
So I think yours goes.
Yeah, this should go this way. Yeah. That work? Ah, it's good. There you go. Oops. All right, let's rotate the same direction. I'll bring Terrence down again to Jessica. Draw an image and just write what that cell does. Just be like one sentence or phrase. What's the job of that cell? I should have put like a explicit prompt for that on here. Next time. All right, one more. The last one on all the sheets, and you just keep this last sheet. And that's your little bone cell study guide. All right, you don't have to show me anything. I have noted who's here and did the activity. Oh shoot, real quick. Quiz number 1, your grades are posted. The class average was a 24.8 out of 30, so about an 83%. For the long answer question, there's an example answer that would have earned full points in Blackboard, so check that out. And I left feedback. If you got full points in that question, I didn't really leave you feedback other than maybe great job. But if you didn't get full points in the feedback section of your quiz, I explain exactly what you did or didn't do to earn the grade you did. I always like to provide a histogram of class grades so you can kind of see where your score falls out in the class. Notice that a big group of you got 25 or over here. Few of you came down on this end. If you're in this end of the distribution, make sure you think about how you're approaching our upcoming tests and things like that. And so you can see here that 4 students total got kind of below a 16 or so on the exam. So just be aware of kind of where you fall and think about what you might need to do for the last exam or the next quiz rather. with that in mind, Danny is holding tutoring sessions. They're going to be every Monday in the lab room and every Thursday in the library, in the ice cube room of the library. We set that up because on Mondays, you're going to want to study for your lab quiz probably the next day. So you can be right in the lab room. Thursdays, it'll be a little closer to the residential side of campus. So please take advantage of that. And otherwise, make sure you see your class program for some readings and a short reflection on quiz number 1 that's due on Friday. We are a couple minutes late. Shoot, I apologize for that. Go, go, go. I will try not to do that anymore. I don't like doing that. Thanks, everybody.